My name is Elara Reed, and I've spent every day of the last 3 years dreaming about this moment. Every wolf knows that when you turn 18, you might find your fated mate. The one person the moon goddess chose just for you before you were even born. The other half of your soul. The moon hung full and bright above the Silver Creek Pack territory, casting everything in an ethereal glow that made even the old buildings look magical. Tonight was the night I'd been waiting for my entire life. Tonight was my 18th birthday. I stood at the very edge of the ceremony ground, my back pressed against the rough bark of an ancient oak tree. From here, I could see everything but remain hidden in the shadows where I belonged. The pack house glowed with warm light spilling from every window. Colorful lanterns hung from tree branches, swaying gently in the evening breeze. The massive bonfire in the center of the clearing reached toward the stars, surrounded by circles of laughing, dancing pack members. Everyone looked so happy. So carefree. The music was loud and joyful, drums beating in rhythm with excited heartbeats, guitars strumming melodies that made even the elderly wolves tap their feet. Children ran between the adults, their faces painted with moon and star designs. Teenage wolves my age danced close to the fire, hoping tonight would be the night they found their mates too. But I stayed in the darkness, like always. You see, I'm an Omega. The lowest rank in our pack hierarchy. While other girls my age wore flowing dresses in beautiful colors, emerald green, deep purple, silver that caught the firelight, I had on my only clean outfit. A simple white shirt that had seen better days and dark jeans with a small hole near the knee that I tried to hide with careful stitching. My hair hung loose around my shoulders, brown and unremarkable. No flowers woven through it like the other girls. No jewelry glinting at my throat or wrists. I'd spent an hour trying to make myself look special for tonight, but in the end, I was still just me. Plain Elara. Orphaned Elara. Omega Elara. The one nobody noticed unless they needed someone to clean up after them. While the other birthday girls had groups of friends surrounding them, offering congratulations and excited predictions about who their mates might be, I stood alone. It wasn't that I preferred it this way. I would have given anything to have friends who cared about me, who would speculate about my future with bright eyes and infectious giggles. But Omega wolves didn't get that luxury. My parents had died in a rogue attack when I was 13, leaving me completely alone in the world. The pack took me in because it was their duty, but that didn't mean they had to like it. I lived in a tiny room in the basement of the pack house, doing whatever jobs no one else wanted to do. Cleaning, cooking, laundry, taking care of the pack children when their parents were busy. I was useful, nothing more. But tonight felt different. Something stirred deep in my chest, like a sleeping animal stretching awake. A pull. A calling that made my skin tingle and my heart beat faster. My wolf, Maya, paced restlessly inside me. She'd been agitated all day, whimpering and scratching at the edges of my consciousness. "Can you feel it?" she whispered in my mind, her voice urgent with excitement. "Our mate is close. Very close." The words sent electricity through my entire body. Could it really be true? Could someone actually be meant for me? I closed my eyes and tried to focus on the feeling. It was like following a golden thread that led somewhere I couldn't see. The pull grew stronger, more insistent, until it felt like an invisible rope tugging at my soul. My eyes snapped open, and I began searching the crowd with desperate hope. There had to be someone. The moon goddess wouldn't be so cruel as to give me this feeling for nothing. Would she? Chapter 2, The Alpha's Presence. That's when I saw him. Alpha Kael stood near the bonfire, and it was like the rest of the world faded away. He was tall and powerfully built, with broad shoulders that spoke of countless hours training and fighting. His dark hair was slightly tousled, as if he'd been running his hands through it, and it caught the firelight in ways that made him look like some ancient god of war. But it was his eyes that stopped my breath completely. Green as the deepest forest, they seemed to glow with an inner light that had nothing to do with the flames around him. Those eyes had seen battle, had made life and death decisions for our entire pack. They were the eyes of a leader, a protector, a warrior who'd never known defeat. He was surrounded by his usual crowd, beta wolves, pack enforcers, and several unmated females who hung on his every word. They laughed at something he said, their voices carrying across the clearing like musical notes. He smiled at them, that devastating smile that made grown women forget how to speak. Kael was everything I was not. Strong where I was weak. Confident where I was invisible. Powerful where I was powerless. And he was 25 years old, which meant he'd been looking for his mate for 7 long years. As I watched him, that pull in my chest grew even stronger. Maya began pacing in excited circles, her tail wagging frantically. "It's him," she breathed in wonder. "Oh, Elara, it's him. Our mate." My heart started hammering so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. This couldn't be happening. The moon goddess couldn't possibly have chosen me for someone like Alpha Kael. There had to be a mistake. But even as I thought it, I knew it was true. The mate bond was unmistakable once you felt it. Like coming home after being lost your whole life. Like finding the missing piece of yourself you never knew was gone. I took a step forward, then another, drawn by forces beyond my control. The crowd seemed to part around me, though I doubt anyone was actually paying attention to the Omega girl moving through the shadows. That's when it happened. Kael turned, scanning the crowd as if looking for something. His gaze swept past dozens of faces, past the dancing couples and laughing groups. Then his eyes found mine. The world stopped. Everything went silent except for the pounding of my heart and the crackling of the fire. The music faded away. The laughter became distant and dreamlike. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Kael's face went through a series of emotions so quickly I almost couldn't follow them. First, there was recognition, the moment he felt the mate bond snap into place between us. His eyes widened slightly, and I saw his chest rise and fall as if he'd forgotten how to breathe. For just a moment, just one perfect moment, he looked at me like I was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. Then the recognition turned to shock. Then disbelief. Then something that made my blood turn to ice in my veins. Disgust. Mate. The word echoed in my mind like thunder, but I could see from his expression that he was thinking something very different. Chapter 3, The Approaching Storm. Kael's jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. His hands, which had been relaxed at his sides, slowly curled into fists. The people around him were still laughing and talking, completely unaware that their alpha's world had just been turned upside down. But I saw it all. I saw the moment he made his decision, and it wasn't the one I'd hoped for. He started walking toward me, his steps slow and deliberate. It reminded me of how he moved when he was hunting, when he was stalking prey that had nowhere left to run. The crowd began to notice. Conversations faltered as people turned to see what had caught their alpha's attention. The music didn't stop, but it seemed quieter somehow, as if even the musicians sensed something important was happening. Someone whispered, "Why is Alpha Kael walking toward the Omega?" Another voice answered, "Maybe she did something wrong." My legs felt weak, but I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't do anything but stand there and wait for him to reach me. The mate bond was singing between us now, a constant hum of recognition and longing that made my skin feel too tight. Maya was whimpering in my mind. "Something's wrong," she said. "He's fighting it. Why is he fighting it?" But I knew why. I'd always known this moment would be too good to be true. Kael stopped about 3 feet away from me, close enough that I could smell his scent, pine and leather, and something wild that made my wolf want to roll over and submit. Up close, he was even more devastating. Tall enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes. Beautiful in the way that dangerous things are beautiful. His presence was overwhelming, radiating the kind of power that made other wolves instinctively step back and lower their eyes. I felt the urge to look away, to show my throat in submission, but something stubborn in me refused to back down. The conversations around us had completely stopped now. I could feel dozens of eyes watching us, waiting to see what would happen. "You," Kael said, his voice deep and cold as a winter night. "You're my mate." It wasn't a question. It wasn't even really a statement. It was an accusation, spoken like I'd personally offended him just by existing. The crowd gasped. I heard someone drop their drink, the sound of glass shattering against stone. Whispers started immediately. Did he just say mate? An Omega? With the Alpha? That can't be right. The moon goddess wouldn't. My cheeks burned with shame, but I forced myself to keep looking at him. To stand straight and proud even though I felt like I was dying inside. Yes, I whispered, my voice barely audible over the crackling fire. The moon goddess. The moon goddess made a mistake, Kael cut me off, his words sharp enough to draw blood. The whispers around us stopped abruptly. Even the music faltered and died. The only sounds left were the popping of burning wood and my own ragged breathing. His words hit me like a physical blow. Maya actually howled with pain inside my mind, the sound so heartbroken that tears sprang to my eyes. But Kael wasn't finished. Chapter 4, The Rejection. Look at you, he said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent clearing. Look at what you are. His eyes traveled over me slowly, taking in my simple clothes, my unadorned hair, the way I had to look up at him because I was so much smaller and weaker. An Omega, he continued, speaking the word like it tasted bad. The lowest of the low. You clean floors and wash dishes. You have no power, no strength, no value to this pack beyond the menial labor you provide. Each word was carefully chosen to hurt, and they did. They cut deep, opening wounds I'd spent years trying to heal. And you think, he went on, his voice getting colder with every syllable, that the moon goddess would pair someone like you with the alpha of this pack? With me? I wanted to argue. Wanted to tell him that the mate bond didn't care about ranks or social standing. That it was about souls recognizing their perfect match. But the words died in my throat under the weight of his contempt. You think you could be Luna? He asked, and this time there was actual amusement in his voice. Cruel amusement that made my skin crawl. You think you could stand beside me, lead this pack, command respect from wolves who are your betters in every possible way? Someone in the crowd snickered. Then someone else. Soon there were quiet laughs rippling through the assembled pack members. I felt about 2 inches tall. I have waited 7 years for my mate, Kael said, his voice rising now so everyone could hear him clearly. 7 years of hoping, of dreaming about the strong, beautiful, worthy female who would stand beside me as my equal. And instead, he gestured at me dismissively. Instead, the moon goddess sends me this. A pathetic Omega who couldn't protect herself from a gentle breeze, let alone help me protect this pack. The laughter was louder now. I saw some of the pack women covering their mouths, trying to hide their giggles. The men were shaking their heads in disbelief and amusement. My entire body was shaking, but I still couldn't move. The mate bond held me there, even as he was systematically destroying me with his words. Please, I whispered, so quietly that only supernatural hearing could have caught it. Don't do this. Not in front of everyone. His eyes hardened even more. You want privacy for your humiliation? That's too bad, because I want witnesses for what comes next. He stepped closer, close enough that I could see the golden flecks in his green eyes. Close enough that the mate bond was screaming between us, begging us to touch, to embrace, to accept what we'd been given. Instead, he leaned down until his lips were next to my ear. You are nothing, he whispered, his breath hot against my skin. You have always been nothing, and you will always be nothing. The sooner you accept that, the easier your pathetic little life will be. Then he straightened up and spoke the words that would haunt me for the rest of my life. I, Alpha Kael of the Silver Creek Pack, formally and completely reject you, Elara Reed, as my mate and Luna. Chapter 5, The Breaking. The formal rejection words felt like knives piercing my heart, each one twisting deeper than the last. The mate bond, which had just formed moments ago and felt like the most beautiful thing I'd ever experienced, began to tear apart inside me. Pain exploded through my chest, radiating outward until every part of my body felt like it was being ripped in half. This wasn't emotional pain, this was physical agony that made me understand why some wolves died from rejection. It literally felt like someone was killing me by inches. I gasped and doubled over, clutching at my chest as if I could somehow hold my breaking heart together with my hands. Maya was screaming in my mind, a sound so full of anguish that it made my vision blur. "Accept the rejection," Kael commanded, his alpha voice forcing its way into my consciousness and demanding obedience. I tried to stay silent. Tried to fight the compulsion. But an alpha's direct command was almost impossible for any wolf to resist, especially an omega. The words were torn from my throat against my will. I gasped, still bent over in pain. "I accept your rejection." The moment I spoke those words, the bond snapped completely. I screamed. The sound tore from my throat like a wounded animal, raw and broken and full of more pain than I'd known was possible. It echoed off the trees and buildings, a cry of pure agony that silenced even the crackling fire. I fell to my knees on the hard ground, my hands pressed to my chest as waves of excruciating pain washed over me. It felt like dying while still being alive. Like having my soul ripped out through my ribcage. Maya had gone completely silent in my mind, and for a terrifying moment, I thought she might be dead. Gone forever, leaving me completely alone in my own head. When the worst of the initial agony passed, I looked up through my tears. Kael was already walking away, his broad shoulders straight and unbending. He moved like a man who'd just taken out the trash, a necessary but unpleasant task that was now behind him. Like I meant nothing. Like I was nothing. But he paused for just a moment and looked back over his shoulder. "Maybe now you'll know your place," he said, his voice carrying easily across the silent clearing. Then he was gone, disappearing into the crowd that parted before him like water. I heard his friends congratulating him, telling him he'd done the right thing. Someone even clapped him on the back. And I was left kneeling on the ground like a broken doll that no one wanted to play with anymore. Chapter 6, The Crowd's Judgment. For a long moment, the entire pack just stared at me. Hundreds of eyes taking in the pathetic sight of the rejected Omega crying on the ground. I could practically hear them thinking, cataloging this moment so they could gossip about it for weeks to come. Then the whispers started again, quieter than before but somehow more cruel. "Well, that was inevitable. Did you see her face when she thought she might actually be Luna? Poor delusional thing. At least now she knows where she stands. I almost feel sorry for her. Almost." Some of the older pack members looked uncomfortable, like maybe they thought Kael had been too harsh. But no one spoke up. No one came to help me. No one offered a kind word or even a sympathetic look. They all just watched and whispered and judged. Beta Marcus, Kael's second-in-command, stepped forward. He was a big man with graying hair and scars that spoke of many battles. Under normal circumstances, he was fair and reasonable. But tonight, he looked at me with something close to pity, which somehow hurt worse than outright cruelty. "Elara," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Perhaps you should go home now. Get some rest. Tomorrow is a new day. Home." As if that tiny basement room could ever feel like a home. But I nodded anyway, because what else could I do? I tried to stand and immediately swayed, my legs still weak from the rejection pain. For a moment, I thought I might collapse again. A hand reached out to steady me, and I looked up hopefully, thinking that maybe someone did care after all. It was Sarah, one of the pack's other Omegas. She was older than me, maybe 25, with kind eyes and worry lines around her mouth. She helped me to my feet without saying anything, but her touch was gentle. "Come on," she murmured. "Let me walk you back." But before we could take more than a few steps, one of the younger pack members called out. "Hey, Elara. Better luck next time, right?" Cruel laughter followed the comment. Someone else shouted. "Maybe you should try the rogue wolves. They're not as picky." More laughter. Louder this time. I stopped walking and turned to look at them. These were wolves I'd grown up with. Wolves I'd helped when they were sick, cooked for when they were hungry, cleaned up after when they made messes. And they were laughing at the worst moment of my life. Something hot and angry unfurled in my chest, pushing back against the rejection pain. Maya stirred weakly in my mind, adding her fury to mine. That's enough, Sarah said sharply, her Omega status not stopping her from defending me. Show some respect. But the damage was done. I could see it in their faces. I wasn't just the orphaned Omega anymore. Now I was the rejected Omega. The wolf who'd been so pathetic that even the moon goddess's choice hadn't been enough. I would never live this down. Never escape the shame and humiliation of this moment. That's when I made my decision. Chapter 7, The Flight. I pulled away from Sarah's supporting hand and straightened my shoulders. My legs still felt unsteady, and my chest still ached with phantom pain from the broken bond, but I managed to stand on my own. Thank you, I told Sarah quietly. But I need to go alone. She frowned, worry creasing her features. Elara, you shouldn't be by yourself right now. The rejection trauma. I'm fine, I lied. I wasn't fine. I might never be fine again. But I couldn't stand here one more second surrounded by people who saw me as entertainment. Who thought my pain was amusing. So I ran. I pushed through the crowd, ignoring the surprised exclamations and renewed whispers my sudden movement caused. Someone called my name, but I didn't look back. I couldn't. My legs carried me away from the lights and laughter, away from the bonfire that had witnessed my public destruction, away from the pack that had never really wanted me anyway. I ran toward the one place I knew no one would follow. The Whispering Woods. Everyone knew the stories about those ancient trees that bordered our territory to the east. They were forbidden for good reason. The woods were said to be cursed, filled with old magic that could drive wolves mad or make them disappear forever. Our elders told stories of pack members who'd ventured too deep and returned speaking in tongues, or worse, didn't return at all. But right now, I didn't care about curses or danger or anything else. Maybe it would be better if I didn't come out. Maybe everyone would be happier if I just vanished into those dark trees and never bothered them again. The thought should have scared me, but instead, it felt almost peaceful. Behind me, I could hear the party slowly returning to normal. The music started up again, though it sounded more subdued than before. People would talk about what had happened for a while, but eventually, they'd move on to other topics. Other gossip. Other sources of entertainment. They'd forget about me, just like they'd forgotten about me when my parents died. Just like they'd forgotten about me every other day of my life. Only this time, I'd make it easier for them. Chapter 8, Into the Forbidden. The woods loomed before me like a wall of shadows. Even from a distance, they felt different from the rest of our territory. Older. Wilder. Touched by something that made the hair on my arms stand up and my wolf instinct scream warnings. But I kept running. The moment I crossed the tree line, the sounds of the pack celebration cut off as if someone had slammed a door. The sudden silence was so complete it made my ears ring. Even my footsteps seemed muffled, like the forest itself was swallowing every sound. The trees were massive, their trunks so wide that it would take several people holding hands to wrap their arms around them. Their branches wove together overhead, blocking out so much moonlight that I could barely see where I was going. Strange sounds echoed around me as I stumbled deeper into the woods. Whispers that might have been wind moving through leaves, or might have been something else entirely. Soft laughter that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The sound of footsteps that didn't match my own rhythm. I should have been terrified. Instead, I felt oddly comforted. Like the forest was welcoming me, embracing me in a way that my own pack never had. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. Then I collapsed against the base of a massive oak tree, its bark rough and solid against my back. The rejection pain hit me again in waves, and I let myself cry for the first time since it had happened. All the tears I'd held back in front of the pack came pouring out now. Great, heaving sobs that shook my entire body. I cried for the mate I'd lost before I'd ever really had him. I cried for the loneliness that would never end. I cried for the little girl who'd lost her parents and spent 5 years hoping someone would love her again. Maya was still mostly silent, but I could feel her sadness mixing with mine. She was hurt too, maybe even worse than I was. Wolves' bonds with their mates ran soul deep, and having that connection severed so brutally was traumatic in ways that humans couldn't understand. Why? I asked the empty forest, my voice cracking with exhaustion. Why did you make him my mate just to let him destroy me? What kind of moon goddess are you? The words felt blasphemous as soon as I spoke them. You weren't supposed to question the moon goddess's plans. But I was too broken to care about propriety. Answer me. I screamed at the canopy above. If you're really there, if you really care about us, then tell me why. Why did this have to happen? What did I do to deserve this? For a long time, there was only silence and the sound of my ragged breathing. Then something began to change. Chapter 9, The Ancient Stirring. At first, I thought I was imagining it. The whispers in the trees seemed to be getting louder, but instead of sounding scary, they sounded soothing. Like voices trying to comfort a crying child. The air around me began to shimmer with a soft, silver light. It started as just a faint glow at the edges of my vision, so subtle I thought it might be tears distorting my sight. But it grew stronger, spreading through the forest like slow-moving water. The light felt warm against my skin, healing in a way that made the constant ache in my chest begin to fade. For the first time since the rejection, I could breathe without feeling like someone was squeezing my heart in their fist. Maya stirred in my mind, lifting her head with interest. Do you feel that? She whispered, her voice stronger than it had been in hours. I did feel it. Power. Ancient and vast and gentle, flowing around me like an embrace. The trees themselves seemed to be humming with it, their leaves rustling in harmony despite the fact that there was no wind. The silver light grew brighter, until the entire forest was bathed in radiance that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It reminded me of moonlight, but richer somehow. More alive. Then I heard footsteps. Not the phantom sounds from before, but real footsteps moving through the undergrowth with purpose. They were coming closer, and with each step, the silver light grew more intense. I should have been afraid. Should have hidden or run or at least tried to make myself smaller. But something deep in my bones recognized this presence, welcomed it. The footsteps stopped just beyond a curtain of hanging moss. Child, a voice said, and the word resonated through me like music made of starlight. The voice was feminine but ageless, gentle but powerful enough to move mountains. It spoke directly to something primal in my wolf's soul, making Maya whimper with recognition and awe. A figure stepped through the moss, and my breath caught in my throat. She was the most beautiful being I had ever seen, though beautiful felt like an inadequate word. She was tall and graceful, with skin that seemed to glow from within. Her hair flowed around her like liquid moonbeams, shifting between silver and white and colors that didn't have names. But it was her eyes that made me certain of who she was. Ancient beyond measure, filled with the wisdom of ages and the gentle strength of someone who had watched over countless generations of wolves. I knew immediately who stood before me. Moon Goddess, I whispered, falling to my knees on the soft earth. Chapter 10, Divine Revelation. She smiled, and it was like sunrise after the longest night. Every shadow in the forest seemed to retreat before that radiant expression. Rise, child, she said, her voice carrying the warmth of summer evenings and the comfort of home. You need not kneel to me. Not tonight. But I couldn't move. Couldn't do anything but stare at her in wonder and confusion. The moon goddess was here, in these forbidden woods, speaking to me. Little Omega Elara who wasn't worth anyone's time or attention. I don't understand, I managed to say. Why are you here? Why are you talking to me? She moved closer, her bare feet making no sound on the forest floor. Where she stepped, small flowers bloomed, night-blooming jasmine and moonflowers that opened their petals to catch her light. You called to me, she said simply. Your pain, your questions, your need for answers, they reached me across the veil between worlds. She knelt in front of me, bringing herself down to my level. Up close, I could see that her eyes held depths that went on forever. Stars seemed to swim in their depths, along with the faces of every wolf who had ever lived. You ask me why, she continued. Why I would pair you with someone who would cause you such pain. It's a fair question, and you deserve an answer. She reached out and touched my face with fingers that felt like cool water on fevered skin. The moment she made contact, images flooded my mind. I saw myself as a child, laughing with my parents before they died. But there was something different about me in these visions. A glow around me that I'd never noticed before. A strength in my small frame that hadn't been obvious. You have always been special, Elara, the moon goddess said softly. Even as a baby, you carried power in your blood that others couldn't see. More images flashed. I saw my parents talking in hushed voices about protecting me, hiding what I was. I saw my mother crying as she performed some kind of ritual over my sleeping form, speaking words in an ancient language I didn't recognize. They knew? I whispered. They suspected, she replied. Your mother carried the bloodline, though it was dormant in her. When you were born, they could sense the power sleeping within you, waiting for the right moment to awaken. What power? What bloodline? I asked, my voice barely audible. Instead of answering directly, she placed both hands on either side of my face. Her touch sent warmth flowing through me, and suddenly I was seeing things that couldn't be real. Chapter 11, Visions of Truth. The forest around us faded away, replaced by visions that took my breath away. I saw wolves unlike any I'd ever imagined. They were larger than normal wolves, with coats that shimmered silver in the moonlight and eyes that glowed like stars. They moved with impossible grace and speed, and when they ran, they seemed to leave trails of silver light in their wake. The silver moon bloodline, the moon goddess's voice echoed around me as the visions continued. My first children, blessed with abilities that set them apart from all other wolves. The scene shifted, and I saw one of these magnificent creatures shifting into human form. It was a woman who looked remarkably like me, same dark hair with silver streaks, same bone structure, same small build. But she radiated power that made the air around her shimmer. Your ancestor, the moon goddess explained. Luna Silviana, the first of the silver moon wolves. She led her pack through the darkest period in werewolf history, when creatures of shadow tried to destroy all my children. I watched in awe as Silviana raised her hands and silver fire flowed from her palms, driving back monsters that looked like wolves made of smoke and nightmare. Other silver moon wolves fought beside her, their combined power creating a barrier of light that the shadow creatures couldn't cross. What happened to them? I asked. Where did they go? The vision changed again, showing me scenes of war and loss. I saw the silver moon wolves fighting desperately against overwhelming odds. I saw their numbers dwindling as the shadow creatures found ways to pierce their defenses. They made the ultimate sacrifice, the moon goddess said sadly. They gave up their immortality, their obvious power, everything that made them visibly different from other wolves. They scattered among the regular packs, hiding their true nature so that the bloodline could survive. I saw Silviana making the same choice, using the last of her visible power to cast a spell that would hide what she and her descendants were. The silver in her hair faded to brown. The glow around her dimmed until she looked like any other wolf. The power remained, the moon goddess continued, but it went dormant. Hidden. Passed down through generations of children who never knew what they truly were. The visions faded, and I found myself back in the forest, staring into those ancient, knowing eyes. I'm one of them, I whispered. I'm a silver moon wolf. She nodded. The last of your line, as far as I know. The power has been sleeping in you since birth, waiting for the right catalyst to awaken it. And Kael rejecting me was the catalyst? Her expression grew sad. Pain is often the key that unlocks our greatest strengths. I did not choose for you to suffer, child. But I knew that when your heart broke tonight, when you felt truly alone for the first time in your life, the protective barriers around your power would finally crack. I felt angry at that, despite talking to the moon goddess herself. So you planned this? You made Kael my mate knowing he would reject me? I made Kael your mate because he needs you more than he knows, she replied. The rejection was his choice, born of pride and ignorance. But it served a purpose, even if that wasn't my intention. She stood and held out her hand to me. The old enemy is stirring again, Elara. The shadow creatures that your ancestors fought are returning, and they're stronger than ever. Soon, all the packs will need to unite or be destroyed. More visions flashed through my mind, dark shapes moving at the edges of our territory, creatures with red eyes and teeth like knives, a war that was coming whether we were ready or not. All the packs will need a leader strong enough to guide them through the darkness, the moon goddess continued. Someone with the power to stand against creatures that regular wolves cannot even touch. She was still holding her hand out to me, waiting. Will you accept your true nature, Elara Reed? Will you let the silver moon bloodline awaken and become who you were always meant to be? Chapter 12, The Choice. I stared at her outstretched hand, my mind reeling with everything she'd told me. The visions, the bloodline, the coming war, it was almost too much to process. But one thing stood out clearly, she was offering me a choice. For the first time in my life, someone was asking what I wanted instead of just telling me what I had to do. What would it mean? I asked. If I accept, what happens to me? Your true power will awaken, she said. You'll become faster, stronger, more intuitive than any regular wolf. You'll be able to sense the shadow creatures when they're near, fight them when others cannot. Eventually, you'll learn to channel silver fire, to heal wounds that should be fatal, to lead with a strength that comes from something deeper than physical ability. It sounded incredible. Impossible. Like something from the old stories that parents told their children to help them sleep. But there's a cost, isn't there? I said, because there was always a cost. There has to be. The moon goddess's expression grew serious. The power will change you. You'll no longer be the same Elara who was rejected tonight. Some will fear you. Others will try to use you. And the shadow creatures will sense your awakening, they'll come for you first, before they attack anyone else. She paused, letting that sink in. Most difficult of all, you'll have to forgive those who have wronged you. A leader consumed by hatred cannot protect anyone, not even herself. You'll have to find a way to work with Kael, despite what he did tonight. My chest tightened at the mention of his name. The rejection wound was still fresh, still bleeding. The idea of forgiving him, of working with him, seemed impossible. I don't know if I can do that, I admitted. I know, she said gently. That's what will make you stronger than your ancestors ever were. They had power from birth, but you'll have earned yours through pain and choice. That makes it infinitely more valuable. I looked around the glowing forest, at the flowers that had bloomed in her footsteps, at the ancient trees that seemed to be listening to every word. This place felt more like home than anywhere I'd ever been. For the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged somewhere. But belonging wasn't enough anymore. Not after tonight. I thought about the pack that had laughed at my pain. About the Alpha who had called me worthless. About all the years I'd spent believing that maybe, if I was good enough, quiet enough, useful enough, someone might care about me. They were wrong. All of them. And I was tired of letting them be right. I reached out and took the moon goddess's hand. The moment our skin touched, the world exploded into light. Chapter 13, The Awakening. Power rushed through me like a dam bursting, filling every cell in my body with energy I'd never imagined possible. It started as warmth in my chest, then spread outward in waves that made my skin tingle and my vision blur. Maya roared to life in my mind, no longer the quiet, submissive wolf she'd been before. She was fierce now, proud, radiating strength that made my spine straighten and my chin lift. Yes, she growled, her voice rich with satisfaction. This is who we were meant to be. The silver light around us grew blinding, and I felt myself changing on a fundamental level. My bones became denser, my muscles more defined. My senses sharpened until I could hear the heartbeat of a rabbit 50 yards away, smell the distinct scent of each individual tree, feel the vibrations of insects walking on leaves. But the most dramatic change was in my appearance. My brown hair began to shimmer, silver streaks appearing and spreading until it looked like spun moonlight. My plain brown eyes shifted to silver, with flecks of gold that caught and reflected the moon goddess's light. When I looked down at my hands, my skin had a subtle glow to it, as if I'd been lit from within by starfire. Beautiful, the moon goddess murmured approvingly. You look exactly like Sylviana did when she first awakened. I felt beautiful for the first time in my life. Not just pretty or acceptable, but truly beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with conventional standards. I radiated power, confidence, otherworldly grace. But more importantly, I felt strong. The broken, rejected Omega was gone. In her place stood someone new, someone who would never again cower before bullies or accept scraps of affection from people who saw her as less than. The physical changes are just the beginning, the moon goddess said. Your true abilities will develop over time, usually triggered by need or strong emotion. But there is one gift I can give you immediately. She pressed her palm against my forehead, and another rush of knowledge flowed into me. Suddenly I understood things I'd never been taught. I knew how to move silently through any terrain, how to fight with techniques that had been lost for centuries, how to call upon the silver fire when I needed it most. More importantly, I understood what was coming. The shadow creatures weren't just random monsters. They were the foot soldiers of something much worse, an ancient evil that had been banished long ago but was now finding ways to seep back into our world. They would start with small attacks on isolated packs, testing defenses and sowing fear. Then they would grow bolder, attacking larger territories until all the werewolf packs were forced to unite or die. When will they come? I asked. Soon, she replied grimly. Weeks, perhaps a month at most. Your awakening will draw them like moths to flame. They can sense silver moon wolves from great distances. The weight of that responsibility settled on my shoulders, but instead of crushing me, it made me stand straighter. I had a purpose now. A reason to be strong. What about the other packs? Will they listen to me when the time comes? The moon goddess smiled sadly. Some will. Others will need to be convinced. And some. She trailed off, her expression growing dark. Some have already been compromised. Chapter 14, Dark Revelations. What do you mean, compromised? I asked, though part of me already suspected the answer. The shadow creatures are cunning, she explained. They've learned from their previous defeat. This time, instead of launching a direct assault, they're working from within. Corrupting pack leaders, turning wolves against each other, weakening the bonds that hold our communities together. She waved her hand, and new visions filled my mind. I saw pack meetings where wolves argued over petty disputes that should have been easily resolved. I saw alphas making decisions that put their own packs at risk. I saw fights breaking out between longtime allies over resources that had been shared peacefully for decades. They're using our own nature against us, I realized. Making us more aggressive, more territorial, less willing to work together. Exactly. And there's more. The visions shifted, showing me wolves I didn't recognize. They looked normal at first glance, but there was something wrong with their eyes. They were too dark, too empty, like looking into wells that had no bottom. Turned wolves, the moon goddess said grimly. Corrupted by shadow magic until they're no longer truly alive. They look like pack members, act like pack members, but they serve the ancient enemy. A chill ran down my spine. How can you tell the difference? Silver moon wolves can see through their disguise, but only when your power is fully awakened. For now, you'll have to rely on instinct. Maya will sense them before you do, trust her reactions. As if summoned by her name, my wolf stirred restlessly in my mind. There's something else, Maya said, her voice tight with worry. Something she's not telling us. I looked at the moon goddess more carefully, noting the tension in her luminous features. What is it? I asked. What else aren't you telling me? For a moment, I thought she might refuse to answer. Then her shoulders slumped slightly, and she looked older than the ageless being she'd appeared to be. The shadow creature's master, she said finally. The one who commands them. He's not just some ancient evil randomly returning to our world. She paused, as if the next words were physically painful to speak. He was one of mine. A silver moon wolf who chose darkness over light, power over protection. His name was Malachar, and he was Sylviana's mate. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Her mate? But how? Love doesn't always conquer all, the moon goddess said sadly. Malachar became obsessed with power, convinced that the silver moon wolf should rule over all other werewolves instead of protecting them. When Sylviana refused to support his vision, he changed. I saw flashes of the story in her eyes. A beautiful male silver moon wolf with eyes like starlight, gradually becoming something twisted and wrong. Arguments between him and Sylviana that grew more heated with each passing day. Finally, his decision to embrace the shadow magic he'd been fighting against, letting it corrupt him completely in exchange for the power to build his own empire. He was banished to the shadow realm, the moon goddess continued. But banishment is not the same as death, and he spent centuries growing stronger, building an army, planning his return. And now he's coming back, I said. Yes. And he knows about you, Elara. The moment your power awakened, he felt it. He'll come for you personally, because a silver moon wolf is the only thing that can truly destroy him. The forest around us had grown quiet during our conversation, as if even the trees were listening to these terrible revelations. I felt the weight of destiny settling on my shoulders like a cloak made of lead. So I don't just have to unite the packs and fight shadow creatures, I said slowly. I have to face down a corrupted silver moon wolf who's had centuries to prepare for this moment. I know it seems impossible, the moon goddess said gently. But you have advantages he doesn't expect. You've known loss, rejection, pain. Those experiences have taught you empathy and resilience that he never possessed. And you won't be facing him alone. Kael, I said, understanding flooding through me. That's why you made him my mate, isn't it? Not just because we're compatible, but because I'll need his strength when the time comes. She nodded. His power combined with yours will be formidable. But first, he has to learn to see past his prejudices. He has to grow into the leader he was meant to be. And if he doesn't? The moon goddess's expression was grave. Then you'll face Malachar alone, and even with all your power, I'm not sure you can win. Chapter 15, Return to the World. The weight of everything I'd learned pressed down on me as the moon goddess began to fade, her form becoming translucent like moonbeams through water. Wait, I called out. Don't go yet. I have so many questions. I know, she said softly. But I've already stayed longer than I should. The other realms need my attention too, and your awakening has sent ripples through the supernatural world that I must address. She reached out one last time and touched my cheek with fingers that were barely solid. Remember, child, you are no longer the Omega who was rejected tonight. You are Elara Reed, last of the Silver Moon bloodline, chosen protector of all werewolves. Let that truth settle in your bones and guide your actions. But how do I convince anyone of that? I asked desperately. How do I make them listen to me when they still see me as worthless? A mysterious smile crossed her features. You show them who you really are. Not with words, but with deeds. Power that is demonstrated speaks louder than power that is claimed. The silver light around us was dimming now, and I could feel her presence slipping away. The first test will come sooner than you think, she said, her voice now barely a whisper. Trust your instincts, trust Maya, and remember, sometimes the greatest strength comes from protecting those who have hurt you. With that, she was gone. The silver light faded until only normal moonlight filtered through the canopy above. The flowers that had bloomed in her footsteps remained, but they seemed ordinary now, just night-blooming jasmine and moonflowers that could have grown here naturally. But I was not ordinary. Not anymore. I stood slowly, marveling at how different my body felt. Stronger, more balanced, humming with power that I could feel but not yet fully control. Maya paced excitedly in my mind, no longer the submissive Omega wolf but a proud, fierce creature ready for battle. The walk back through the whispering woods felt different than my desperate flight into them. The trees no longer seemed threatening, if anything, they felt protective, like old guardians watching over me. Night creatures that should have hidden from a predator instead gathered to watch me pass, their eyes reflecting moonlight as they sensed something new and powerful moving through their domain. When I reached the edge of the forest, I paused to look back at the pack territory spread out below me. The bonfire had died down to glowing embers, and most of the pack had gone home. Only a few stragglers remained, probably the teenagers too excited to sleep and the adults too drunk to walk straight. From here, they looked small. Insignificant. Like children playing at being grown-ups while real danger gathered in the shadows they couldn't see. But they were my responsibility now, whether they knew it or not. Whether they wanted my protection or not. I started walking toward the pack house, and with each step, I felt more of my old self falling away. The girl who had stood at the edge of the ceremony ground hoping for acceptance was gone forever. The Omega who had cleaned floors and accepted scraps of kindness was dead and buried in those ancient woods. In their place walked someone new. Someone who would never again beg for a place at anyone's table, because she had her own table now, and she would decide who was worthy to sit at it. Chapter 16, The First Test. I was halfway across the main courtyard when I heard the screams. They came from the direction of the pack dormitories, high-pitched sounds of terror that cut through the quiet night like knives. My enhanced senses immediately kicked in, and I could smell blood in the air along with something else, something wrong and unnatural that made Maya bare her teeth in my mind. Shadow creatures. Just as the moon goddess had warned, they could sense my awakening. Without thinking, I ran toward the sounds of distress, my new speed carrying me across the distance in seconds. As I got closer, I could hear more details, growls that didn't sound like any normal wolf, the sound of claws raking against stone, and underneath it all, a child crying. The scene that greeted me in the dormitory courtyard made my blood run cold. 3 creatures that looked like wolves made of living shadow were circling a group of terrified pack members who'd been caught outside when the attack began. The shadow wolves were larger than normal wolves, with eyes that burned red like coals and teeth that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Most horrifying of all, they were herding the pack members like sheep, driving them toward a 4th creature that stood on 2 legs but was definitely not human. It had the basic shape of a person, but its proportions were all wrong, too tall, with arms that hung nearly to the ground and fingers that ended in claws longer than my hand. And it was feeding. One of the older pack members, a man named Robert who'd always been kind to me, lay motionless at the creature's feet. There was no blood, but he looked empty. Like something essential had been drained out of him. "Help us," someone screamed when they saw me. It was Sarah, the Omega who tried to walk me home earlier. She was clutching a small child, little Emma, who couldn't be more than 5 years old. The shadow creatures turned toward me as one, their burning red eyes fixing on my face. The tall one straightened up from Robert's body and smiled with a mouth full of needles. Well, it said in a voice like breaking glass. "The little silver moon awakens at last. Master will be so pleased." For just a moment, the old Elara tried to surface. The part of me that wanted to run, to hide, to let someone else handle the dangerous situation. But that girl was gone. Maya roared to life in my mind, and with her came instincts I'd inherited from generations of Silver Moon warriors. I could see the creature's weaknesses now, the places where their shadow forms were less stable, the way they moved that revealed their attack patterns. More importantly, I could feel the silver fire stirring in my chest, waiting to be called upon. "Let them go," I said, my voice carrying an authority I'd never possessed before. "Your fight is with me." The tall creature laughed, a sound like nails on a chalkboard. "Oh, little wolf. You have no idea what you're facing. I am Grimfong, lieutenant to Lord Malachar himself. These mortals will feed my pack, and then we'll take you back to our master as a gift." "I don't think so," I replied calmly. I held out my hand, and silver fire flowed from my palm like liquid moonlight. Chapter 17, Silver Fire. The moment the silver fire appeared, everything changed. The shadow wolves recoiled with howls of pain, their forms becoming less solid as the light touched them. Grimfong snarled and took a step back, raising one clawed hand to shield his burning red eyes. Impossible, he hissed. The bloodline was extinct. We made sure of it. You missed one, I said, and let more power flow through me. The silver fire spread from my hand to engulf my entire arm, then my whole body. It didn't burn me, instead, it felt like coming home, like embracing a part of myself I'd never known was missing. The pack members behind me gasped in awe and fear. I heard Sarah whisper, "What is she?" But I didn't have time to explain. The shadow wolves were recovering from their initial shock, and Grimfong was preparing to attack. Kill her, he commanded his pack. Quickly, before she learns to use it properly. 3 shadow wolves launched themselves at me simultaneously, moving faster than normal eyes could follow. But my enhanced senses tracked their movements easily, and my inherited memories told me exactly how to respond. I spun to the left, letting the first wolf pass harmlessly by while I grabbed the second one by its shadowy throat. The moment my silver fire touched it, the creature began to dissolve, its form unraveling like smoke in a strong wind. The third wolf managed to rake its claws across my shoulder, but instead of cutting skin, they passed right through the silver fire surrounding me. I backhanded it casually, and it went flying across the courtyard to crash into a stone wall. Grimfong roared in fury and charged me himself, moving with speed that would have been impossible for a human to match. But I wasn't human. Not anymore. I met his charge head-on, our bodies colliding with a sound like thunder. His claws scraped against the silver fire around me, unable to penetrate my defenses. In return, I drove my fist into his chest, and he screamed as the silver fire began burning through his shadowy form. "This isn't possible," he gasped, staggering backward. "You just awakened. You shouldn't be this strong." "Apparently, rejection is very motivating," I replied, and pressed my attack. The fight was over quickly after that. Without his wolf pack to support him, Grimfong was no match for the full power of a silver moon bloodline. My silver fire consumed him piece by piece until nothing remained but a lingering smell of sulfur and burnt shadow. The courtyard fell silent except for the soft crying of little Emma and the ragged breathing of the survivors. I turned to face the pack members I just saved, and saw my reflection in their wide, frightened eyes. I was still glowing with silver fire, my hair flowing like liquid moonlight, my transformed appearance making me look like something from their oldest legends. For a moment, no one spoke. We just stared at each other across a distance that suddenly seemed much greater than the few feet of stone between us. Then Sarah stepped forward, still clutching Emma protectively. "Elara," she said uncertainly. "Is that really you?" I let the silver fire fade, though I kept enough power flowing through me to maintain my transformed appearance. No point in hiding what I was now. "It's me," I said gently. "Though I'm not the same person you knew before." "What are you?" asked Marcus, the pack's other Omega. His voice held awe rather than fear, which I took as a good sign. "I'm what I've always been," I replied. "You just couldn't see it before tonight." Before anyone could respond, we heard more sounds coming from other parts of the pack territory. More screams, more inhuman howls. The attack on the dormitories had just been the beginning. "Get inside," I told the survivors. "Lock the doors and don't come out until dawn. These creatures hunt in the darkness." "What about you?" Sarah asked. I looked toward the pack house, where I could see lights coming on as more people realized they were under attack. Somewhere in there, Kael was probably organizing the defense, completely unaware that conventional weapons would be useless against shadow creatures. "I'm going to save our pack," I said simply. Chapter 18, The Pack House Battle. The scene at the pack house was chaos. Warriors were running in all directions, some in human form and others shifted to their wolves. But their attacks were passing right through the shadow creatures, while the monsters' claws and teeth were finding their marks with deadly precision. I could see at least a dozen pack members down, some injured and others drained of life force like poor Robert had been. The shadow creatures seemed to be everywhere at once, materializing from dark corners and vanishing when conventional attacks came too close. At the center of it all stood Alpha Kael, magnificent even in the midst of disaster. He'd partially shifted, allowing his claws and enhanced strength to emerge while keeping his human form for strategic thinking. His shirt was torn and bloody, evidence that he'd been fighting hard despite the futility of it. But he was losing, and he knew it. I watched him slash at a shadow wolf with claws that should have been able to cut through steel, only to have them pass harmlessly through the creature's form. In return, the shadow wolf's bite left very real gouges in his arm that dripped blood onto the stone floor. "Fall back," he was shouting to his warriors. "Get the children to the safe room." It was a good tactical decision, but it wouldn't matter. The shadow creatures would follow them anywhere they went, and no ordinary safe room could keep out beings made of living darkness. Time to announce my presence. I gathered silver fire around myself like armor and walked calmly into the center of the battle. The first shadow creature to notice me let out a shriek of recognition and pain, drawing the attention of all the others, including Kael. Our eyes met across the chaotic battlefield, and I saw his expression cycle through a dozen emotions in the space of a heartbeat. Shock at my transformed appearance. Confusion about what I was doing here. Recognition of the power radiating from me. And underneath it all, something that might have been regret. But there was no time for emotional reunions. A pack of shadow wolves was converging on a group of teenagers who'd been caught in human form when the attack began. They were going to be slaughtered in seconds if I didn't intervene. I moved. My new speed carried me across the room faster than thought. I reached the teenagers just as the shadow wolves pounced, and met them with a wall of silver fire that made them scream and retreat. "Get behind me," I told the terrified kids. "Stay close and keep moving toward the stairs." I began advancing through the room, silver fire flowing from my hands in controlled streams that forced the shadow creatures back step by step. Where the fire touched them, they began to dissolve, their forms becoming less stable until they finally fell apart completely. The pack warriors had stopped fighting to stare at me in amazement. I heard someone whisper, "Is that Elara? The Omega?" Another voice answered, "Can't be. Look at her." But Kael wasn't staring. He was thinking, his tactical mind already adjusting to this new development. "Everyone rally on Elara," he commanded. "Stay close to her light. She can hurt these things." It was the first smart thing anyone had said all night. Chapter 19, Fighting Together. What followed was the strangest battle of my life. With me as the tip of the spear, we began systematically clearing the pack house of shadow creatures. I would lead with silver fire, forcing the monsters into the open or destroying them outright, while the pack warriors protected our flanks and made sure none of the creatures could circle around behind us. Kael fought beside me, and despite everything that had happened between us earlier, we moved together like we'd been training as partners for years. When I focused on a group of shadow wolves, he made sure no other creatures could attack me from my blind spots. When he called out tactical observations, I adjusted my movements to support his strategies. We fit together perfectly, like two pieces of a puzzle that had finally found their proper places. Maya was practically purring in my mind. "This is what it should have been like," she said. "This is why the moon goddess paired us with him." She was right. In combat, our mate bond was an advantage that multiplied both of our strengths. I could sense his intentions before he spoke them aloud, and he seemed to anticipate my movements with supernatural accuracy. But I couldn't let myself think about that. Not yet. There would be time for complicated emotions later, if we survived the night. We'd cleared most of the main floor when I heard a sound that made my blood freeze. A child screaming. The sound came from upstairs, where the Alpha family's private quarters were located. But Kael didn't have children, and most of the pack kids should have been evacuated to the safe room by now. Unless someone had been left behind. "Upstairs," I said, already moving toward the grand staircase. "Wait," Kael called out. It could be a trap. He was probably right. The shadow creatures were cunning, and using a child's voice to lure us into an ambush was exactly the kind of tactic they'd employ. But I couldn't take the risk. I bounded up the stairs 3 at a time, silver fire streaming behind me like a comet's tail. Behind me, I could hear Kael cursing as he followed with several of his warriors. The screaming was coming from the end of the hallway, from what I knew was a guest room that had been empty for months. As we approached, I could see dark smoke seeping out from under the door, and the air grew cold enough that our breath began to mist. "Definitely a trap," muttered one of the warriors. "Probably," I agreed. "But we're going in anyway." I kicked the door open and stepped into a nightmare. The room had been transformed into something from the shadow realm. The walls seemed to be made of living darkness that writhed and shifted when you looked at it directly. Strange symbols glowed with red light on every surface, and the temperature was so cold that frost was forming on the windows. In the center of it all stood a figure that made Grimfong look like a minor inconvenience. Chapter 20, The Shadow Lieutenant. The creature was enormous, at least 8 feet tall and built like a cross between a werewolf and a demon. Its body was covered in scales that absorbed light, making it difficult to focus on directly. Its eyes burned with intelligence and malice, and when it smiled, I could see rows of teeth that looked like they'd been carved from black diamond. But worst of all was the child it held in one massive clawed hand. Little Tommy, one of the pack's youngest members. He was unconscious, his small body limp and pale. I could see the creature's claws pressed against his throat, ready to tear it open at the first sign of trouble. "Elara Reed," the creature said in a voice like grinding stone. "The last Silver Moon Wolf. I am Vorthak, general of Lord Malakar's armies. You will come with me willingly, or the child dies." Behind me, I heard Kael growl low in his throat. "Let him go, monster." Vorthak's burning gaze flicked to the Alpha dismissively. "I have no business with you, dog. My master wants the Silver Moon Wolf alive and undamaged. Stand aside." "Not going to happen," Kael snarled, and I could feel his power building as he prepared to shift to his full wolf form. But I put a hand on his arm, stopping him. "Wait," I said quietly. Then, louder, "What does Malakar want with me?" Vorthak's smile widened, showing even more of those horrible teeth. "He wishes to make you an offer. Join him willingly, and he will spare your precious pack when the great culling begins." "Refuse." He squeezed slightly, and Tommy whimpered without waking up. "The child will be the first to die, but not the last. We will slaughter every wolf in this territory, starting with the weakest and working our way up. The Alpha will be last, so he can watch his pack's destruction and know it was all because of your stubborn pride." The threat hung in the air like poison. I could feel the pack warriors behind me tensing, ready to fight but knowing that any aggressive move would result in Tommy's death. "And if I come with you?" I asked. "The boy lives. Your pack lives. And you will be given a choice. Serve Lord Malakar willingly, and he will grant you power beyond imagination. Continue to resist, and you will serve him anyway, but only after he breaks your mind and reshapes it to his liking." It wasn't really a choice at all. Either way, I ended up as Malakar's slave. The only question was whether I retained any free will in the process. But that didn't matter. I couldn't let Tommy die because of me. Couldn't let the pack be slaughtered for my defiance. "Elara, no," Kael said, reading my intentions in my expression. "We'll find another way." I turned to look at him, really look at him, for the first time since the rejection. He was beautiful, even covered in blood and grime from the battle. But more than that, he was genuinely concerned for my welfare. Not because I was useful to him now, but because the thought of losing me was causing him real pain. Maybe there was hope for us after all. "Take care of the pack," I told him softly. "And when Malakar comes for them anyway, because he will, remember what you saw tonight. Remember that sometimes the most unlikely people turn out to be exactly what you need." I started to step forward, toward Vorthak and certain doom. That's when Maya spoke up in my mind, her voice calm and confident despite our desperate situation. "Did you forget what the moon goddess told us?" she asked. "About demonstrating power instead of claiming it?" I paused, understanding flooding through me. Vorthak had made one crucial mistake. He thought I was the same frightened Omega who'd been rejected earlier tonight. He had no idea what I was truly capable of now that my power had fully awakened. Time to show him. Chapter 21, Silver Lightning. Instead of walking toward Vorthak, I smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. It was the smile of a predator who just realized her prey had walked into a trap. You know what I think? I said conversationally. I think Malakar sent you here because he's afraid to face me himself. Vorthak's eyes narrowed. Choose your words carefully, little wolf. Oh, I am, I replied. I think he remembers what happened the last time a silver moon wolf opposed him. He remembers how Sylviana and her pack banished him to the Shadow Realm like the coward he was. And now he's so terrified of facing another silver moon wolf that he sends his minions to do the dirty work. The temperature in the room dropped even further, and Vorthak's grip on Tommy tightened. Enough, he snarled. You will come with me, or what? I interrupted. You'll kill one small child and somehow that will convince me you're strong? That you're worthy of respect? I let silver fire begin to flow around me again, but this time it was different. Instead of the gentle light I'd used before, this was harsh and bright, like captured lightning. I've got a better idea, I said. How about you put the boy down, and I'll show you why your master is too much of a coward to come here himself. Vorthak roared in fury and raised his free hand, dark energy crackling around his claws. But he'd made a critical error. He'd let his anger override his tactical thinking. The moment he moved to attack me, I acted. Silver fire erupted from me in all directions, but instead of random flames, it formed into dozens of precise, lance-like beams. Most of them struck Vorthak directly, causing him to howl in pain and stagger backward. But one beam had a different target. It wrapped around Tommy like a gentle cocoon, yanking him out of Vorthak's grip and pulling him safely across the room to where Kael could catch him. Impossible. Vorthak gasped, looking down at his hands where the silver fire had burned away several scales. You cannot have that much control so soon after awakening. Apparently I'm a fast learner, I said, and attacked with everything I had. What followed wasn't really a fight. It was a massacre. Vorthak was powerful, I'll give him that. His dark magic was able to block or deflect some of my attacks, and his physical strength was enormous. Under normal circumstances, he probably could have torn through a dozen regular wolves without breaking a sweat. But I wasn't a regular wolf. I was a silver moon, and I had 5 years of pain and rage to fuel my power. I hit him with silver fire that burned like acid through his shadowy form. When he tried to teleport away, I followed him, moving through shadows like they were doorways. When he summoned more shadow creatures to help him, I destroyed them so quickly they barely had time to manifest. And through it all, I could feel my abilities growing stronger, more refined. Each technique I used became easier the second time. Each spell I cast was more powerful than the last. It was like I'd been training for this my whole life and just hadn't known it. The end came when Vorthak tried one last desperate gambit. He gathered all his remaining power and launched it at me in a concentrated beam of pure shadow magic, the kind of attack that should have been able to kill even a silver moon wolf. I caught it in my bare hands. The shadow magic writhed and fought against my grip, but I held it steady while silver fire flowed down my arms to meet it. Where the two energies touched, there was a sound like the world tearing apart. Then the shadow magic was gone, consumed completely by my silver fire. Vorthak stared at me in absolute terror, his burning eyes wide with disbelief. This cannot be, he whispered. You are newly awakened. You should not possess such power. Maybe, I said, advancing on him step by step. Or maybe you've forgotten what happens when you corner something that has nothing left to lose. I raised my hand, silver fire gathering around my fingers like liquid starlight. Give Malakar a message for me, I said. Tell him that the silver moon bloodline isn't extinct. Tell him that we remember what he did to our ancestors. And tell him that if he wants me, he can come and take me himself instead of sending his lackeys to threaten children. Vorthak nodded frantically, his earlier arrogance completely gone. But most importantly, I continued, letting my power build until the entire room was filled with silver light. Tell him that I'm nothing like Sylviana. She was merciful. She gave him a chance to redeem himself before she banished him. I smiled, and there was nothing pleasant about it. I won't make that mistake. With that, I released just a fraction of my power. The silver fire struck Vorthak like a physical blow, sending him flying backward through the window. He crashed through the glass and tumbled down 2 stories to land in the courtyard below. When I looked out the window, he was already gone, dissolved back into shadow and retreating to whatever dark realm he'd come from. The room fell silent except for the sound of glass tinkling to the floor and Tommy's soft breathing. Chapter 22, Aftermath. I turned around to find everyone staring at me in complete silence. Kael was holding Tommy protectively against his chest, but his green eyes were fixed on me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Behind him, the pack warriors were looking at me like I'd just performed a miracle, which I suppose I had. The child in Kael's arms stirred and opened his eyes. Alpha? Tommy mumbled sleepily. What happened? Why does everything smell like lightning? You're safe now, Kael told him gently. Elara saved you. Tommy looked around the destroyed room with wide eyes, taking in the scorch marks on the walls and the shattered window. Then his gaze found me, still glowing with residual silver fire. Wow, he breathed. Are you an angel? The question was so innocent, so pure, that it almost broke my heart. Here was a child who could see past my Omega status, past my unremarkable appearance, to something more fundamental. No, sweetheart, I said softly, kneeling down to his level. I'm just me. But I'm glad you're okay. Tommy smiled at me with the absolute trust that only children possess. Thank you for saving me. Anytime, I promised, and meant it. Kael cleared his throat. We should get him to the pack doctor, make sure he's not injured. I nodded, though my enhanced senses could already tell that Tommy was fine, scared and confused, but physically unharmed. As we made our way downstairs, I could hear the sounds of the pack regrouping. The shadow creatures that had been attacking the main floor were gone, either destroyed by my silver fire or fled when they sensed Vorthak's defeat. People were emerging from hiding places, tending to the wounded, and trying to make sense of what had just happened. And all of them stopped to stare when they saw me. I looked different now than I had at the beginning of the night. The silver streaks in my hair were more pronounced, my eyes glowed with inner light, and there was something in my bearing that commanded attention. But more than my appearance, it was what I'd done that had changed their perception of me. An hour ago, I'd been the rejected Omega, the girl everyone pitted or ignored. Now I was the silver moon wolf who'd saved their pack. Chapter 23, Recognition. Beta Marcus was waiting for us in the main hall, coordinating the cleanup efforts. When he saw us coming down the stairs, he immediately approached. Alpha, he said to Kael, then turned to me. Elara. The pack owes you a debt we can never repay. No debt, I said firmly. This is my pack too. Protecting it is my responsibility. Marcus nodded respectfully, but I could see the questions in his eyes. Questions about what I was, how I'd gained such power, what this meant for the pack's future. How many casualties? Kael asked, getting straight to business. 3 dead, Marcus replied grimly. Robert from the dormitories, and 2 of the night watch who were caught outside when the attack began. Dozen more injured, but nothing life-threatening thanks to... He gestured at me. Thanks to Elara's intervention. 3 deaths. 3 pack members who would never see another sunrise because Malakar's forces had come hunting for me. The guilt hit me like a physical blow. These people had died because I existed, because my awakening had drawn the shadow creatures here. It's not your fault, Kael said quietly, reading my expression. Isn't it? I replied. They came here looking for me. Those people died because... Those people died because evil exists in the world, he interrupted firmly. You didn't create that evil, and you're not responsible for its actions. What you are responsible for is saving dozens of other lives tonight. His words helped, but only a little. The weight of leadership, of being responsible for others' safety, was heavier than I'd expected. We need to talk, Kael said, his voice low enough that only I could hear. About what happened earlier. About everything. I looked at him, this man who had been my mate for all of 10 minutes before rejecting me. Who had called me worthless in front of the entire pack. Who had just watched me demonstrate power beyond anything he'd ever imagined. There was so much we needed to discuss. So much pain and anger and confusion between us. But not tonight. Tomorrow, I said. Tonight, your pack needs their alpha. And I need to figure out what comes next. He nodded, understanding. Where will you go? Your old room. I almost smiled at that. My tiny basement room with its single window and hand-me-down furniture. After what had happened tonight, I could never go back to living like that. Not because I thought I was too good for it now, but because the person who had lived in that room no longer existed. I'll find somewhere, I said. Don't worry about me. But before I could leave, Sarah approached us. The Omega who had tried to help me earlier was looking at me with something close to awe. Elara, she said hesitantly. We, all of us Omegas, we want you to know how proud we are. How grateful. Behind her, I could see the pack's other low-ranking members nodding agreement. Marcus and 2 other Omegas, plus several of the servants and workers who kept the pack running. For the first time in our lives, Sarah continued, we've seen one of us be powerful. Important. You've shown everyone that rank doesn't determine worth. Her words touched something deep in my chest. I'd been so focused on the big picture, the coming war, Malakar's threat, the need to unite the packs, that I'd forgotten about the smaller but equally important impact of my transformation. You're wrong about one thing, I told her gently. I haven't shown them that rank doesn't determine worth. You've all always had worth. Tonight just forced everyone else to finally see it. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, and she nodded gratefully before melting back into the crowd. Chapter 24, A New Dawn. I left the pack house as the first hints of dawn were beginning to color the eastern sky. The battle was over, the pack was safe for now, and I needed time alone to process everything that had happened. But I wasn't alone for long. Maya was practically bouncing with excitement in my mind, no longer the quiet, submissive wolf she'd been before my awakening. Did you feel it? She asked eagerly. The power, the way everything just felt right when we were fighting? I had felt it. For the first time in my life, I'd felt like I was exactly where I belonged, doing exactly what I was meant to do. The moon goddess was right, Maya continued. This is who we really are. Not some weak Omega hiding in the shadows, but a silver moon wolf meant to protect our people. I walked through the pack territory, noting the damage from the night's battle. Broken windows, scorch marks on buildings, trampled gardens where people had fled in panic. It would all be repaired in time, but the scars would remain as a reminder of the night everything changed. Some of those scars were on me too, I realized. The rejection had broken something in me, but it had also cleared away all the self-doubt and desperate need for approval that had held me back for so long. I was no longer the girl who would accept scraps of affection and be grateful for them. No longer the Omega who would clean up after others and never expect thanks. I was something new now. Something that had never existed before. The sun was fully up by the time I reached the place I'd decided to go. It was a small cabin on the outskirts of the pack territory, abandoned for years but still structurally sound. It had belonged to an elderly couple who died in the same rogue attack that killed my parents, and no one had bothered to claim it since then. It would do nicely as a home for someone who no longer fit into the pack's traditional hierarchy. As I pushed open the dusty front door, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to see Kael approaching, still looking tired and battle-worn but determined. I thought I might find you here, he said. Did you follow me? I asked. I asked around. Sarah mentioned that you used to come here sometimes when you needed to be alone. That was true. When the pack house became too overwhelming, when the constant reminders of my low status became too much to bear, I would sometimes walk out here and sit on the old porch, imagining what it would be like to have a real home. Now I was about to make that imagination reality. What do you want, Kael? I asked, too tired for elaborate courtesy. He was quiet for a long moment, his green eyes studying my face like he was seeing me for the first time. "I want to apologize," he said finally. "For what I said tonight. For how I treated you. He gestured helplessly. "For all of it." Chapter 25, The Conversation We Should Have Had. I looked at him standing there in the morning light, this powerful alpha who commanded respect from hundreds of wolves, asking for forgiveness from someone he'd called worthless just hours before. Part of me wanted to accept his apology immediately. The part that remembered the mate bond, that had felt how perfectly we worked together during the battle. The part that could see the genuine regret in his eyes. But another part of me, the part that had been shaped by years of rejection and dismissal, wasn't ready to forgive so easily. "Why?" I asked. "Why are you apologizing now? Because I turned out to be useful? Because I have power you can use?" He flinched as if I'd struck him. "That's not. Isn't it?" I interrupted. "When you thought I was just an omega, I was worthless. Beneath your notice. But now that you've seen what I can do, suddenly I'm worthy of an apology." "You're right," he said quietly, and the admission surprised me. "That's exactly what this looks like. And maybe that's exactly what it is." His honesty was unexpected. Most people would have tried to defend themselves, to claim their motives were pure. But that doesn't make the apology less sincere, he continued. "I was wrong about you. Completely, utterly wrong. And I'm sorry for that." He stepped closer, his expression earnest. "I spent 7 years looking for my mate, dreaming about the perfect woman who would stand beside me as an equal. When the bonds snapped into place and I saw you, an omega, someone I'd barely noticed despite living in the same pack house for years, I felt cheated. Like the moon goddess had played a cruel joke on me." His words hurt, but I appreciated his honesty. "So I lashed out," he continued. "I rejected you as cruelly as I could, thinking that would somehow make the disappointment easier to bear. And now?" I asked. "Now I realize that the moon goddess doesn't make mistakes. She knew exactly what she was doing when she paired us." He met my eyes directly. "I was the one who wasn't ready. I was looking for someone who would fit into my preconceived notions instead of someone who would challenge me to be better." I studied his face, looking for any sign of deception or manipulation. But all I saw was genuine remorse and something that might have been hope. "What are you asking for, Kael?" I said. "Forgiveness? A second chance? For me to pretend tonight never happened?" "I'm not asking for anything," he replied. "I'm just offering. If you ever decide you want to explore what we might have been, what we might still be, I'll be here. But I understand if you can't. I understand if what I did was unforgivable." The mate bond was still there between us, I realized. Damaged, scarred, but not completely severed. I could feel his emotions bleeding through, regret, hope, and underneath it all, a growing attraction to the powerful woman I'd become. But I also felt something else. Respect. For the first time in our acquaintance, Kael was looking at me as an equal. "I need time," I said finally. "Time to figure out who I am now. Time to deal with the threats facing our pack. Time to heal from what happened tonight." He nodded. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here when you're ready." "And if I'm never ready?" His smile was sad but genuine. "Then I'll have to live with the consequences of my choices. But I hope you'll at least let me fight beside you when the real war comes. As allies, if nothing else." I considered that. Whatever personal issues we had between us, Kael was a good alpha and a skilled warrior. When Malachar finally made his move, I would need all the help I could get. "Allies," I agreed. "For now." He nodded and turned to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth," he said without looking back, "I think you're magnificent. I should have seen it before, and I'm sorry I didn't. But I see it now." With that, he walked away, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the morning sun streaming through the dusty windows of my new home. Chapter 26. building something new. The days that followed were unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Word of the shadow creature attack spread quickly through the supernatural community, along with the news that the Silver Moon bloodline had returned. By the end of the first week, I was receiving visitors from neighboring packs, all wanting to see the legendary wolf who had defeated Malakar's lieutenant. Some came out of curiosity. Others came seeking protection for their own territories. A few came with offers of alliance against the growing darkness. And some came to challenge me, convinced that the stories were exaggerated and that defeating one shadow creature didn't make me a threat. Those wolves left with a very different perspective. I'd moved into the old cabin completely, spending my days learning to control my new abilities and my nights patrolling the pack territory for signs of another attack. The cabin was small but comfortable, and for the first time in my adult life, I had a space that was truly mine. Sarah and the other Omegas helped me fix it up, bringing furniture and supplies without being asked. It was their way of showing support for what I represented, the possibility that low-ranking wolves could be more than their designated roles. But the most surprising development was how the pack's attitude toward me changed. It started with small things. Pack members who had never acknowledged my existence before began nodding respectfully when they saw me. Children who had been taught to ignore Omegas started asking their parents if they could grow up to be like Elara. Then the bigger changes began. Kael instituted new policies that gave more opportunities to low-ranking wolves. Training sessions that had been restricted to warriors were open to anyone who wanted to learn self-defense. Decision-making councils that had been limited to betas and higher now included Omega representatives. He never said it was because of me, but everyone knew. "He's trying to win you back," Maya observed one evening as we watched the sunset from our new porch. She wasn't wrong. Kael's actions over the past week had been those of a man trying to prove he'd learned from his mistakes. Not just through words, but through meaningful change. "Is it working?" she asked teasingly. I considered the question honestly. The anger I'd felt immediately after the rejection was fading, replaced by something more complex. I could see that Kael was genuinely trying to be better, not just for me but for the entire pack. And when we worked together during the various meetings with other packs, we still moved like partners who'd been training together for years. The mate bond might be damaged, but it was definitely still there. Maybe, I admitted. But there are bigger things to worry about right now. Chapter 27, Gathering Storm. The reports were getting worse every day. Pack territories across the region were being hit by shadow creature attacks. Most were smaller than what we'd experienced, scouting parties rather than full assaults, but the pattern was clear. Malakar was testing defenses, gathering intelligence, and gradually increasing the pressure on all frontrunts. Worse, some packs were simply disappearing. Entire territories would go silent, their borders left unguarded, their pack houses empty. When scouts investigated, they found no signs of battle, no bodies, nothing to indicate what had happened to hundreds of wolves. It was like they'd all just vanished. Turned wolves, I explained to the emergency council that had formed to address the growing crisis. Malakar is converting entire packs instead of destroying them. Building his army from our own people. The council consisted of representatives from 12 different packs, all looking to me for guidance despite the fact that I was technically still just a pack member, not even an official leader. "How do we fight an enemy that looks exactly like us?" asked Alpha Morrison from the Red Ridge pack. He was an older man with gray in his beard and worry lines around his eyes. "Carefully," I replied. "And together. Isolated packs are easy targets. United, we might have a chance." That was the real challenge. Werewolf packs were notoriously independent, each one convinced they could handle their own problems without outside interference. Getting them to work together was like trying to herd cats. Particularly difficult was convincing them to accept leadership from someone who wasn't an official alpha. "With all due respect," said Alpha Catherine from the Mountain View pack, "you may have power, but you lack experience. Some of us have been leading our packs for decades." She wasn't wrong. I was 19 years old and had been aware of my true nature for less than 2 weeks. By traditional standards, I had no business trying to coordinate a multi-pack defense strategy. But traditional standards weren't going to save us from an enemy that could turn our own people against us. Experience matters, I agreed. That's why I need all of you. Your knowledge, your tactical expertise, your understanding of your own territories. But someone needs to coordinate our efforts, and that someone needs to be able to fight the shadow creatures effectively. I let silver fire flow around my hands as a demonstration. How many of you can do this? I asked. None of them could, of course. Which was exactly my point. I'm not asking you to surrender your authority over your own packs, I continued. I'm asking you to work with me to create a defense network that gives us all the best chance of survival. It was a hard sell, but gradually, they began to come around. Not because they particularly wanted to follow a teenage Omega, but because the alternative was facing Malachar alone. By the end of the meeting, we had the framework for a united defense. Communication networks between all the packs. Coordinated patrol schedules. Plans for rapid response when attacks occurred. And most importantly, an agreement that if any pack went silent, the others would investigate immediately before the shadow creatures could consolidate their gains. Chapter 28, The Test. Our new alliance was tested sooner than expected. 3 days after the council meeting, we lost contact with the Riverside Pack. They'd been one of the smaller groups in our network, only about 60 wolves total, but their territory controlled a crucial river crossing that connected several larger pack lands. When their scheduled check-in didn't come, I knew we had to act fast. I'm going with you, Kael said when I announced my intention to investigate personally. It could be dangerous, I warned. If the pack has been turned, we'll be walking into a trap. All the more reason for you to have backup, he replied. Besides, you'll need someone who knows the territory. I've been to Riverside Pack lands several times for trade negotiations. He was right, though I suspected his real motivation was concern for my safety rather than tactical necessity. In the end, we traveled with a small scouting party, myself, Kael, Beta Marcus, and 2 of our best warriors. Large enough to handle trouble, small enough to move quickly and quietly. The journey to Riverside Pack territory took most of a day, traveling through dense forest and crossing 2 mountain ridges. As we got closer to their borders, the wrongness in the air became more and more apparent. The forest was too quiet. No bird songs, no small animals rustling in the underbrush. Even the insects seemed to have fled. Something's very wrong here, Marcus muttered as we approached the pack house. He was right. The building looked normal from the outside, no signs of battle, no obvious damage. But there were no sounds coming from within, and no sense of living wolves. Where is everyone? Asked one of the warriors. I was wondering the same thing. A pack of 60 wolves should have been easily detectable to our enhanced senses, even from a distance. But it was like the territory had been completely abandoned. Spread out, I instructed the group. Check the surroundings, but don't go inside any buildings alone. If you see anything suspicious, retreat immediately and call for backup. We spent the next hour searching the pack grounds. The dormitories were empty but showed no signs of struggle. The communal kitchen still had food on the tables, as if everyone had simply stood up in the middle of dinner and walked away. But there were no bodies. No blood. No indication of where 60 werewolves had gone. This doesn't make sense, Kael said as we regrouped in the main courtyard. Even if they were attacked by shadow creatures, there would be some trace. Some sign of what happened. That's when I noticed it. Look at the ground, I said, pointing to the dirt around the pack house. At first glance, it looked normal. But when I focused my enhanced senses, I could see the subtle traces that others missed. Footprints that were just slightly wrong, human-shaped but with an unnatural gait. Scent trails that smelled like pack members but with an underlying wrongness that made my skin crawl. Turned wolves, I breathed. The entire pack has been converted. Chapter 29, The Ambush. The attack came without warning. One moment we were standing in the empty courtyard, discussing our findings. The next, wolves were pouring out of the surrounding buildings, familiar faces with empty, soulless eyes. But these weren't the shadow creatures we'd fought before. These looked exactly like the Riverside pack members we'd known and traded with. The only difference was in their expressions, cold, emotionless, like looking at mannequins wearing wolf faces. "Don't let them surround us," Kael shouted, immediately taking charge of the tactical situation. But we were already surrounded. Turned wolves were emerging from every direction, moving with perfect coordination like they were sharing a single mind. Which, I realized, they probably were. I gathered silver fire around myself and lashed out at the nearest group of attackers. The turned wolves recoiled from the light, but they didn't dissolve like the shadow creatures had. Instead, they circled us at a distance, looking for openings. "They're still mostly alive," I called out to the others. "The silver fire hurts them, but it won't destroy them completely." That complicated things significantly. These had been innocent pack members before they were corrupted. If there was any chance of saving them, I had to try. But that restraint put us at a severe disadvantage. The turned wolves had no such limitations. They attacked with savage efficiency, coordinating their assaults in ways that regular wolves never could. When one was driven back, another immediately took its place. When we focused on one group, another attacked from our blind spot. "We need to get out of here," Marcus yelled as he barely dodged a set of claws that would have opened his throat. He was right. We were outnumbered at least 10 to 1, and fighting defensively against an enemy that felt no pain and showed no mercy was a losing proposition. But before we could retreat, more figures emerged from the pack house. These weren't turned wolves. They were shadow creatures in humanoid form, moving with the fluid grace of predators who had been hunting for centuries. And leading them was a figure I recognized from the visions the moon goddess had shown me. He was tall and elegant, with features that would have been beautiful if not for the complete absence of warmth in them. His hair was silver white, and his eyes were the color of starlight, but cold starlight, distant and uncaring. He looked almost exactly like the silver moon wolves from my visions, except for one crucial difference. Where their power had radiated light and life, his radiated death and corruption. "Malachar," I whispered. He smiled, and it was like looking into an Arctic winter. "Hello, little moonchild," he said in a voice that was beautiful and terrible at the same time. "I've been so looking forward to meeting you." Chapter 30, Face to Face with Evil. The turned wolves and shadow creatures stopped their attack immediately when Malachar appeared, forming perfect ranks behind him like soldiers awaiting orders. The sudden silence was somehow more terrifying than the chaos of battle had been. "You're smaller than I expected," Malachar said, studying me with those cold, star-bright eyes. "And younger. Are you certain you're Sylviana's descendant? You seem rather insignificant." His casual dismissal was clearly intended to provoke me, and for a moment, it almost worked. Maya snarled in my mind, urging me to attack, to show this ancient evil exactly how insignificant I was. But I forced myself to stay calm. This was exactly the kind of emotional response he wanted. If I attacked in anger, I'd be fighting on his terms instead of my own. "Size isn't everything," I replied evenly. "Your Lieutenant Vorthak learned that lesson the hard way." Malachar's smile widened. "Ah yes, poor Vorthak. He was always too eager, too confident in his own abilities. I suppose I should thank you for teaching him humility." The casual way he spoke about his subordinate's defeat was chilling. There was no anger, no desire for revenge. Just cold calculation, as if Vorthak's failure was nothing more than data to be analyzed. "What did you do to these people?" I asked, gesturing at the turned wolves surrounding us. "I freed them," he replied. "From doubt, from fear, from the burden of making their own choices. Now they serve a higher purpose. They're slaves. They're perfected," he corrected. "No longer limited by individual wants and desires. No longer weakened by emotions or moral qualms. They are exactly what werewolves were meant to become." The turned wolves stood motionless as he spoke, their faces blank and expressionless. Looking at them was like looking at corpses that hadn't realized they were dead yet. "Is that what you want to do to all of us?" I asked. "Eventually," he said with the same casual tone he might use to discuss the weather. But not you, little moonchild. You're far too valuable to waste on simple conversion. He stepped closer, and I could feel the corruption radiating from him like heat from a fire. My silver fire automatically responded, creating a barrier between us. You and I are going to work together, he continued. You're going to help me complete what I started centuries ago. And why would I do that? His smile became predatory. Because the alternative is watching everyone you care about die slowly and painfully while you're forced to watch. As if to demonstrate his point, he gestured toward Kael and the others. The turned wolves immediately moved closer to them, claws extended and ready to strike. One word from me, Malachar said softly, and your precious Alpha becomes another member of my army. Then your Beta. Then every single member of your pack, one by one, until you're the only one left with free will. The threat hung in the air like poison gas. I could see the fear in Kael's eyes, not for himself but for what my answer might be. What do you want me to do? I asked. Malachar's smile became triumphant. There are barriers, you see. Ancient protections that prevent me from accessing certain resources. But those barriers were designed to keep out shadow magic, not silver moon power. Understanding hit me like a physical blow. You want me to use my power to break through protections that you can't breach yourself. Exactly. There are caches of ancient weapons, stored power, knowledge that has been locked away since the First War. With your help, I can access all of it. And if I refuse? He gestured again, and one of the turned wolves grabbed Kael around the throat. I could see the corruption beginning to spread where the creature touched him, dark veins appearing on his skin. Then your mate becomes my first demonstration of what happens to those who oppose me, Malachar said calmly. The impossible choice. I stood there in that empty courtyard, surrounded by enemies, with the fate of everyone I cared about balanced on the edge of my decision. Everything had led to this moment. The rejection that had broken my heart. The awakening that had revealed my true nature. The battles that had shown me what I was capable of. All of it had been preparation for this impossible choice. Save the people I loved by helping an ancient evil gain the power to destroy everyone else, or watch them die to preserve the greater good. Maya was silent in my mind, knowing that this was a decision I had to make alone. The silver fire around me pulsed with my heartbeat as I looked from Malachar's cold, confident face to Kael's frightened but determined eyes. The Alpha who had rejected me was now looking at me with complete trust, silently telling me that he would accept whatever choice I made. Even if it cost him everything. The turned wolves pressed closer. The shadow creatures waited motionlessly for their master's command. And somewhere in the distance, I could hear the sound of more enemies approaching. I had seconds to decide the fate of my world. And in that moment, I remembered the moon goddess's words, sometimes the greatest strength comes from protecting those who have hurt you. I smiled, and it was neither pleasant nor afraid. You made one mistake, Malachar, I said quietly. His confident expression faltered slightly. Oh. And what would that be? You assumed I'd make the same choice Sylviana did. You assumed I'd choose mercy over victory. I let my silver fire build, drawing on power I hadn't known I possessed. The light grew brighter and brighter, until even the turned wolves had to shield their eyes. But I'm not Sylviana. I'm something new. Something you created when you sent your creatures to attack my pack, when you threatened the people under my protection. The silver fire around me began to change, becoming harder, sharper, more focused. I'm the wolf you should never have pushed too far. And with that, I attacked, not with the controlled precision I'd used before, but with every ounce of rage, pain, and protective fury that had been building inside me since the night everything began. The real war had started.
To be continued in Part 2. The Luna's Awakening. Next episode preview. Elara's desperate gambit against Malachar forces her to tap into power she doesn't fully understand, with consequences that will change everything. Meanwhile, the supernatural world learns that the Silver Moon bloodline has returned, drawing both allies and enemies from across the globe. And Kael must confront the truth about what it means to be mated to a legend in the making.